The nightmare of parents of special needs children is what happens when the parents grow old, the children become adults, and the support begins to fade. In Massachusetts, that fear has been eased by turning 22, a transition from special education to community services. But in recent years, turning 22 has come under attack from budget cuts. Up in Beacon Hill is House Bill 983, designed to help those too old to be considered for special education services. With us to talk about that bill is its co-sponsor, Representative Tom Sannicandro, Democrat from Ashland and also representing parts of Framingham. Good morning to you, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Before we get to your bill, tell us what happens in Massachusetts when a special needs adult turns 22.
Yeah, so under Massachusetts law and federal law, the town or the school district is required to provide an education for every student until they either graduate from high school or turn 22. So what happens is students that need significant special services or special education services typically will go to the age of 22. Up until that time, it has been an entitlement under the law, meaning that if you have significant needs, you're entitled to this education. Once you turn 22, the entitlement ends, and essentially you're not entitled to anything anymore. And the school district or the town or city is no longer financially responsible for your education. So ultimately what happens when a student who's been receiving special education services and has significant needs turns 22, essentially the funding stops completely. What we're talking about is the line item in the budget, in the state budget, is called Turning 22. And what that is, that's an allocation of funds to support those students that still need services when they turn 22 and the school district is no longer providing them.
Now, the state has, or does it have a definition of a special needs adults that it's going to help?
Yeah, typically what the Turning 22 line item comes under the Department of Developmental Services. And the Department of Developmental Services, under the regulations, is they will provide services for someone who has an IQ of 70 or less. And that IQ of 70 or less, they had that IQ prior to age 18. And then they have, the test is something like 2 or 3, has difficulty performing 2 or 3 of major life functions. So typically what we're talking about is someone with an IQ 70 or below, and they may need support in different areas. They may need reminders to get up and brush their teeth or different things like that, that they can't do what most typical people can do in a day, that they do need some support services to be successful around daily life living functions.
Now, this is a pretty strict 70. For example, if you're 70, if your IQ that is 72, the state can come in and say they, A, on one side, look at their budget, B, look at your IQ of 72, 73, 74 and say, can't help you.
That's exactly what happens. So that if you do have an IQ that's over 70, it's very difficult to get services under DDS, which is the Department of Developmental Services. There's a problem with that, and I'll let me just get in front of you a little bit.
Do.
So the definition I gave before is that you need this IQ prior to 18. So there's a lot of problems with the definition. So if you have this, suppose you have issues with your IQ because you had a head injury, right? Mm-hmm. So if you had a head injury and you were age 17, and because of that head injury, your IQ is now 70 or below, you will qualify under DDS. If you have that same head injury on your 18th birthday and your IQ is 70 or below, you no longer qualify for DDS services, ever, because your IQ was in the typical range above 70 before the age of 18. So that's one problem. The other problem that we're seeing a lot of now is adults, young adults that have Asperger's. So there's some folks that have which Asperger's is on the autism spectrum. So some adults with Asperger's may test out with IQs 100, 120. They could be actually very high IQs, but they don't have the same ability to do the main daily life functions that I talked about earlier. You know, maybe they have a very high IQ, but they don't have the ability to get to work. They don't have the ability to shower at certain times. Or they're just not able to function like other folks. So under the definition, because their IQ is over 70, they're not entitled to services under this. And the reason for that really is a money reason, because we would love to provide services for all these people, but we just can't at this point. And I think the legislature is very reluctant to expand these definitions because it's going to cost more money.
Now, your bill H983.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit. It is, first of all, pumping money into the Turning 22 system.
Essentially what it is to turn Turning 22 from into an entitlement program, so that people would be entitled to these services, or there would be money designated in the budget during during every budget. Because right now it's up to the legislature and the governor whether that occurs. The governor's budget came out in late January, and he designated $5 million, which is a level funding over last year. So, and it's level funding actually over a number of years at this point. The problem is with the $5 million even he's designated, which is, it's good, it's a good amount, it's good to keep this level in the kind of fiscal times we're in. But the problem is we have many more students turning 22 than we did last year. The number this year actually is the estimate for this year is going to be 730, I think it's 735. Before we hit this last recession, we were pumping in somewhere between $7 and $8 million to the Turning 22 line item to support these students, or these young people. And we had approximately half as many young people turning 22. So we essentially are dealing with half as much money, not counting for inflation, and twice as many people. So it's really causing some significant hardships for the people in Massachusetts.
And there is no, say, forecast, or probably can't have it because of all of the other different programs under 22 saying, look, you know, we've got an increase and that's going to rise to the top. Some, like they do say a little bit of Social Security, they're going to say Social Security is going to go broke because there's going to be this many people, but it must be pretty hard to do.
That's not hard to do.
Okay.
The hard to do part is Social Security is an entitlement program, meaning you're entitled. You meet the criteria, you're going to get the money. This is not an entitlement program. So you meet the criteria, you have the IQ of 70 or below, you need support during the day to function, you're still not entitled to services.
Okay. Does the state need to change the way they think outside of making it an entitlement program, but in terms of long-term care, that for this budget it isn't enough just to say, okay, we'll keep it this year and we'll rethink it next year, that there has to be as long care is needed for someone. They're going to be disadvantaged this year, 10 years from now they're going to be disadvantaged, that the state needs to really think in terms of budgeting for this or the programs. They need to think long-term as opposed to a year-by-year basis.
Well, that's part of what the bill does, is to force that sort of expanded budgeting out over many years. So that's the major thrust of this bill. There's another piece I'd like to just mention to you, because there's all this is a lot of different moving pieces. But one of the things, I filed another bill that's called the Real Lives Bill, and what that bill does is it says, if DDS is going to give you money, right, if you need supports, what they'll do is they'll say, okay, here's your budget, you go hire the people, or you figure out what kind of services you need. And what we've seen is this is happening all around the country, and it is the new movement of how people should be doing it, right? So if you're a person with a disability or you have a family member with a person with a disability, it makes more sense for you as a family to make decisions on what that person needs for services. And we've seen around the country that that actually can be more cost effective. Because sometimes the way the system works now, you get plugged into a slot. And sometimes that slot is giving you more services than you want or services that you don't want. But you have to take, it's a take everything plan. And you may not need that. And I think that there's a lot of ways for improvement in this system that we really should be looking at. This is something that I've been pushing since I've been in the legislature. So I've been pushing this for 8 years at this point. And we did get one bill through originally, but it didn't have the teeth it needed. There's another bill pending in the legislature now that does have the teeth, that would do this. And it's important for people to be able to make decisions about their lives, and that's what it's all about.
And one of the components is employment. A lot of these people, even though they may not be able to work on their own, can hold down a job.
So employment has a whole bunch of facets to it. So first, let's talk about the person that has a disability. If you're a person with a disability, you may need some job training, right? And you can be trained to do a certain job and be very successful at it. You may need a little more than that, so you get trained, and then you may need someone to go in and check on you maybe once a month, once every couple months, to say, hey, you're doing all right. Or you may need someone on a regular basis. There's people with significant needs that need someone almost right next to them to help them do the job. The issue is that if you have a family member with a significant disability, some of these folks really need support 24 hours a day. So you can't really leave them home alone. So unless the person with a disability has support services and job training or can get out in the job, someone has to stay home to make sure that person's safe. So you have another person out of work. So essentially you end up with 2 people out of work instead of 2 to 3 people working. So essentially this makes it helps the economy because everybody's working.
Speaking of the economy, which is not good right now, and I'm sure this affects the mindset of what goes on, and we'll say specifically Beacon Hill. Is it an uphill battle? Do you have to fight tooth and nail for any of this? I mean, where does the political climate put this on a priority?
That's the question, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge. I think people tend to support it, but it really needs to be made a priority by a lot of people. I think, politically, how, supporting people with disabilities, how you can't go wrong with that politically, right? So we see bipartisan support of this, but you really need someone to lead the charge, because without someone leading the charge, there's so many other issues and so many other needs in the Commonwealth that sometimes this can get pushed to the bottom. So you need someone to champion this to make it move through the system.
Okay. Representative Tom Sannicandro, Democrat from Ashland. Also, you represent certain parts of Framingham. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. You're watching Conversation on WBPX.